currently we all have that yearning to be private, to choose how we want the world to know us. And should we lose that power, our reputation, our dignity, our wealth goes through the window. The moment you open the door to privacy, the other rights will go through. Who has heard of Suleiman Chidandala? He was a Kampala politician. Mwamumanyako? Yeah, thank you very much. He used to be a serious politician in town here. He was one time a deputy, Lord Mayor. So he had a discussion with the former IGP, and he had his opinion. He had his opinion. Unfortunately, his opinion was recorded, and it made rounds. The moment it made rounds, his reputation flew out of the window. He never became the same again. Obaliwa simanyi. So these WhatsApp groups we are on, we give opinions. You see, opinion, as we will see, is also personal. That is personal data, opinion. It's personal data. Once your opinion goes to someone and it's not favorable, your reputation might not be the same. A lot goes out of the window when privacy is what? Is infringed. Your reputation, discrimination, you know. And you see, especially with health information, you will be discriminated. You can be discriminated. How many of you would marry a partner who has a history of mental illness? Hey. Many people have lost relationships because their medical history was shared. No, definitely. It should be shared to a certain extent. But there are those who had mental illnesses and they recovered. Even when you recovered, once they know that so and so had a mental illness before, chances of even promoting you might be. Imagine you're a head human resource and you want to elevate a certain staff, and information comes that musajja ono yagwawo ku ddalu katono naye taddangamu. Would you promote that person? I can't stop to count the number of people who have lost jobs because they're HIV positive. The moment he's HIV positive, they are seen as incapable rather. So we are saying that what should be done to reduce such risks of losing reputations. But before I go here, so privacy, that is, so data protection is essential. Data protection, what Mr. Abirikuja was asking. Now that is regulating how far should someone go into your personal space. What data protection does is that it gives you the power as a data subject. It gives you the power to object, to consent to the use of your personal data. That's what data protection does now. It gives you that power. It goes further to give the data collector or controller responsibilities, obligations, and roles. So as a patient, I ought to give you everything about my health, the history of my health. As doctors, you could be able to analyze, understand, and give me appropriate medication. The only people that should have access to full-time medical records should be the health professionals involved in giving us the care. Okay? It should be held on servers that are secure. So where data is used beyond individual care, for example in research, minimum data should be, because definitely as health institutions you have to do research. Okay? You conduct research to understand maybe what medication should we even, given the records of people who have been attending, how much should we buy in terms of medication and all that. But also in understanding how certain diseases evolve or mutate. You've seen how COVID has been changing. Definitely you need to track records of different people, do research, but you should only collect that you need. Okay? No, information that you should have on you should honestly look like that. Okay? So personal information, as we will see, is information that identifies you as an individual. That identifies you. That I can look at that information and know that surely this is Sempala Alan Chigozi. With certainty. Now the information you should have, how many of you can tell who was in that data? Can you tell who was in there? Because the personal data was depersonalized. Information relating to identifiable people was removed. And this is the kind of information that you should keep. So we need privacy to be able to enjoy any other right there is. Okay? That is why, if I'm to ask, without fear of contradiction, who you voted for in the last elections, I might have 2-3 answers. The people who can confidently tell me I voted for this one. Why? Because whoever you voted for is your... Because we enjoy the right to privacy, we also enjoy to choose whoever we want without other people doing what? You get my point? So with the right to privacy, with privacy, we can enjoy wholesomely the right to vote. We can enjoy the right to associate. So because we need privacy, you don't want to be predicted. You first have to appreciate that this right has to be there. So whoever is responsible for ensuring that it's there should make it a point to ensure it. But look at this. The right to privacy can never be enjoyed if your personal data is out there. Now members, what is personal data? Now personal data, like I mentioned earlier on, Section 2 of the Data Protection and Privacy Act defines what personal data is. Okay? Personal data can be a name, your name, like mine, Sempala Alan Chigozi, that is personal data. It can be a home address, Josula, because we said personal data is any information that can identify who you are. Okay? An email such as sempala@rubagahospital.com or .org or .co.ug. The NIN number, your NIN number on your national ID can be your, it can be personal data. Location data on phones, okay? Now, some of us use transport companies to move from one point to another, like SafeBorder, Uber, Bolt. Now, when we use such companies, or some of us order food online, do we have people who have ever ordered food online here? You've ever? How was the feeling? It was good. You liked it. Now, do you know that they know where you stay? You know. Now, what happens when you ask for food online or when you ask for transport? Your raw GPS data is also captured. So they don't only capture your name, contacts, so they capture that information. So what happens is that your routine is usually known if you use a transport company. Okay? So whoever collects that personal data ought to be very responsible. Now for us, we enjoy the convenience, and we hope that whoever takes our personal data is responsible. But now that we have the law, we have the powers to ask them what personal data they have about us and ask them to delete it. If they don't delete it, we only hope that they are responsible. So members, that is personal data. But there is what is not personal data. Things like company registration number. Okay? Things like an email address such as info@IHK. Things like anonymized data. Now we have special personal data. Now this is sensitive data. Section 9 of the DPPA Act, the Data Protection and Privacy Act, provides for such information that you should not process. But there are exceptions. But let's look at information that you should not process. The racial or ethnic origin of a data subject, Jemva, Egwanga Lyange, you should not process that. My political opinion, you should not process that. My religious beliefs, whether I'm a member of a trade union, my mental, physical condition, or health information. Now, health information is related to information you capture when a patient comes to you. Okay? So, but you can collect that information. We have exceptions. If it's necessary for the performance of your duty or your job, you can collect that information. The other exception for collecting special data, UBOS is allowed to collect such information. You can collect that information still if you have explicit consent.
Information privacy, and it goes that it addresses the rights of individuals to control how and to what extent information about the clients, or what in this case we call personal information, is collected and further processed. My colleague who was here in the previous session, Alan, talked about privacy, and I think we are now aware of what privacy is. And if you look at the other end, there is information security, which is about ensuring that confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets. So how does these two concepts interlinked? If you look at this illustration here, like I told you, there is no way you're going to make sure that the information you're storing is private when you haven't put in safeguards or measures to make sure that it is not accessed by unauthorized parties. For instance, if you have data on a server and this server maybe doesn't have a firewall, so that means that the server is liable to attacks, cyber attacks. So if this server is accessed without your permission, and God forbid this server had information about the patients, maybe you can see maybe HIV status, any other personal data, it is stored in on that server. So what happens is, if this server is compromised, that means its security is compromised, right? So at the same time, the data that you have stored there is also compromised. So these two concepts, information privacy and information security, move together. That's why you have to make sure that you uphold both of them at the same time. You know, that is what we call the Data Protection and Privacy Act. My colleague Becca here will be talking about it in the next session. And this act has a section called security measures, that's section 20. And this section instructs data collectors, data processors, and any other entity that collects data to make sure that they put appropriate and reasonable technical and organization measures to make sure that the information that they collect, the information that they process, is safeguarded from attacks. So the first step in this process is identifying the reasonable internal and external risks. By internal risk, I mean anything, maybe for this case it might be a whistleblower inside the organization, so that is a risk. And by external attacks or external risks, we can refer to external cyber attacks. For instance, maybe social engineering, maybe denial of service attacks, and all other kind of cyber attacks that are launched outside the organization or the company, or for this case the hospital. Then after identifying these risks, the next step to do is you have to you have to set up appropriate safeguards to make sure that you can mitigate these risks from happening. Remember, the first step is identifying them. Then the next one is setting up or establishing appropriate safeguards against the identified risks. It can be putting up access control systems. It can be doing capacity building inside the company or the organization to make sure that these attacks don't happen, because you're expecting them. So the next step is regularly verifying that safeguards are effectively implemented. You know, some people, after setting up these systems, after setting up these control systems to mitigate cyber attacks and all that, they forget to do regular checks. They forget to do checks to make sure that the safeguards that they put in maybe in the previous years are still working. So you have to do regular checkups and see if these safeguards are actually up to date to mitigate the ongoing cyber attacks and risks. The last step is ensuring that the safeguards are continually updated in response to the new risks of deficiencies. So Section 23 of the Data Protection Act also gives you an obligation, or tells you to report data breaches. You know, in most cases, companies and hospitals, not only hospitals, but also other companies that deal with personal data, they face data breaches. And this is common in this era because there is no way you can avoid security breaches and all that. But after experiencing these data breaches, most of the companies keep quiet. So you have to report these security breaches as soon as possible. My colleague here, Becca, will come and tell you the fines that are associated with not reporting these data breaches whenever they happen. So like I said, Section 20 of the Data Protection Act tells you, as a data collector, as a person who is handling data in your hospital or in any other company, to make sure that there are technical and organization measures. By technical, I mean things like I talked about access control systems. Technical, it can be firewalls. It can be a lot of other technical things that you can put in place to make sure that cyber attacks don't happen in your organization, to make sure that the personal data of the clients is not breached. So organizational measures can be policies. For instance, the privacy policy can be the information policy. So as a data protection officer, you have to make sure that the company or the hospital that you work for has these measures in place to mitigate such attacks. So moving on, one of the appropriate measures here they suggested is using encryption. Encryption is a format of what they call, my colleague has been talking about pseudonymization. It's about making sure that the information you send from one party to the other is in a format that is not readable by the middleman. For instance, if I want to send a high message to a person on the other corner, it is when I use encryption, it is presented in a format. Maybe it can be twisted to other characters, and the person in between here cannot read it. So you have to make sure that the measures you put in place abide with this confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You also need to ensure that you have appropriate processes in place to test the effectiveness of your measures and undertake any required improvements. So the measures that you put in place should make sure that data can be accessed, altered, disclosed, or deleted only by those who have authorized to do so. This is you have to make sure that this actually happens. You know, in the organization or the companies we work for, in most cases we forget to put to come up with policies and that guide on how we use the data of our clients. You find that a person who is working at the front desk is able to access maybe information about other people in the organization. So we have to make sure that we put controls on people who access our data, and we have to make sure that only the authorized people have access and can use this data.
So this law, it's not that we didn't have any law that talked about data protection, these rights and privacy. They were there, but you know, they were in different sectors. I've heard you say in the health sector, you have your standard at which you're required to keep the information. So we had them before the law, but what this law did, it creates a comprehensive one, so that when a person is dealing with you, they don't have to deal with the nitty-gritty. Now on your end, you know what you have to do. So personal data, this one you've already looked at it. I'll just emphasize a few things. You know, it's information that identifies you. There's what they call identifiers, of course, your name. As long as a person can tell that this is Becca and that is Chris with the information they have before them. You know, this could be identifiers such as your name, email address, phone number, your TIN, social security number, but then it also includes the employee's information such as academic qualifications. Of course, we sit for these exams or tests individually, right? You're given certificates individually. You know this question, you know the people who can answer it very well are politicians, because they know the cost. Those academic qualifications are not given to your sister and you use them to go to parliament or whichever office. So that's why we call it personal data. Now, when during the registration process, very many people just give us information they collect from their patients or customers. Also, your employees are individuals. At least in Uganda, we haven't seen anyone employing artificial intelligence or robots up to that level that they are employees. So the employees that you have, the academic qualifications are not just academic qualifications, but even the disciplinary action that you take, because it's taken against an individual and it's kept on file. You know, this also includes what we call habits. You know, when you use applications, most of you have a website. You can tell a person, raise a complaint, or maybe find out your medical history, you know, from these online applications. So if you're able to actually get a person's habit, that's also personal data. But there is a category which is called special personal data. Because it's called special, because in case any person misuses it, it can have a greater impact on the person. And guess what? You work in a sector that exclusively deals with that. One of them is health or medical related records. So you need to be aware that the information that you're dealing with is sensitive or special. The others include financial information, of which you also do, because you need to get details of the person, probably the account, how much they paid, if they're part of an insurance coverage, and all those related things. So as you can see, more is expected from the health sector. So if you're to remember anything from today's conversation, it should be that slide, principles. Now, these principles, when I ask you what personal data protection is about, it's about that slide. Because the person from whom you collect the information, this is where their rights come from. And now you, as the people collecting and using this information, this is where your responsibilities also emanate from. So this is something that you should learn and implement as an individual, but also with your staff when you're advising them, you'll be showing them how to go about it. But in my presentation, this one is going to go a little more into compliance. And I'll show you how you will go about it. So the first principle is that data, personal data for that matter, should be collected lawfully. What we mean by lawfully is that you should have a legal ground which you best to collect this information. Now, the Data Protection and Privacy Act gives these legal grounds. But I also need to emphasize, not one ground is greater than the other. You can use either or. This is a law that allows you to look at your operations and you advise as the data protection officers which one is most applicable to your data collecting and processing operations. So the first is consent, which most people know. Consent, of course, you should let the person know what you're collecting, which information, how you're going to use it, with whom you may share it with, and related aspects. And then the other one is through provision of a contract. You know, this one is usually, you know, you have agreements where you sign, possibly you tell a person, we need your information. The best example is as employees, you know, they give you terms, which are legally are called an offer. We want to employ you, we'll be paying you this much for this long, but we need your information to be able to pay you your salary, so they'll collect your account number. Then if they use mobile money, they'll get those other details. Then they'll need to get where you stay. Of course, your next of kin in case anything happens to you. Remember, all this information is being collected. But now as an employee, that information is collected as part of a contract. If you agree, you sign the contract. Then the other is if it is required by law. So some of the information you do not necessarily determine that you need to collect it, but the law requires you to collect it. Now this can include getting your TIN. Of course, your employee needs to pay as you earn. Then the other is, it could be now outside of the health records, know your customer. You know, you walk into a bank, then they require some information, including your national ID, so that they can be able to comply with your know your customer obligations. Then the other ground, which caters for you, it is what we call medical grounds. Now, the medical grounds is squarely within your sector, so it could be to admission or maybe diagnosis, giving treatment, so that at least the law caters for you. And actually this is unique because we introduced it to make your work easier, because in not so many jurisdictions they have this ground. So you have a way, because you know your operations, the entire process of how you onboard a patient, how you ensure they're given treatment, because you know a treatment, some of the tests that can be done, they could be fatal, you know that, right? Don't use information in a way that would alarm a person. I walk into a hospital, I get treatment, of course I trust you, I give you the information. This one I'm just using it as a way of an example. I'm not picking on anyone. I'm going to use two to make it, to drive the point home. Someone talked about HIV, right? Working with HIV related patients. So I walk into the hospital. Of course, maybe a person, I have a strain of another HIV, I'm wondering how should I deal with it? I'm being asked to form part of a clinical trial for that strain of HIV. So clearly that is an unfair way of using my information, because I gave it to you in confidence. Or the other could be having a mental health issue. You get it? Then, because we received a complaint where it was medical related, people are receiving rehabilitation. Then another company wanted to understand the trends in Uganda. So they got the database that had all this information. This is not beyond mental, just the general one. So then the people started reaching out to us and wondering, but how did this get there? This was supposed to be used in confidence. So that way, the people who used the information used it unfairly. That's the point I'm driving to. So fair could only be related to the purpose and the consent or the ground that the person has relied on to give you the information. So you should be transparent. Now, transparency is about before you collect the information, let people know which information you're going to collect, with whom you may share it with, what you're going to use it for, how long you intend to keep it, and how you will secure it, amongst others. Now, this is ideally provided for in what is called a privacy notice that we'll see later on, and how to go about it, and the practical ways of doing it. Because at times, you know, giving this so much information to a person, it may not be practical, and it won't help them, because they'll have so much information and they will not make an informed decision. Make sure that when you're capturing the information, give the person ability to confirm if the information they've given you is actually correct. Online is a bit easier. You know, in a form you're told to review. but usually, manually people do not ask you, whether you can confirm. Please have that in place. We'll look at the penalties in case you do not. So I've heard you talk about storage limits. Now, these storage limits, the law does not, our law, specifically the Data Protection and Privacy Act, does not give thresholds within which to keep this information. But it says, only keep this information for the purpose for which you got it, or if you're required by law. I've heard you talk about Ministry of Health requiring you, is it, to keep information for a particular period of time. So only keep that information for such a time. Now, we've been advising that the data protection officer should be empowered. In most instances, is a person who should be reporting to the highest level of management. But of course, you're aware there are different levels of, how companies run. Sometimes, it could be an officer or it could be a manager. So at whatever level you are at, in case you are appointed, you give people advice and they discard it. What you should do is that you should document it when you're giving this advice. You either send an email, to those people telling them do A, B, C, D, or if they don't use email, you write a document, and then addressing it to this person. Now, if they do not use it, and for you at least you'll have the record, because when you come in to do the audit, and you just start giving us, verbal, I talked to those people, I'll ask you, okay, where are the minutes of the meeting? Was it in a meeting? Was it recorded in the minutes? Were they signed off? Did you send an email? Who was copied in that email? Because we'll have that as our evidence. So now we'll go to that person who was advised and disregarded it. Now, whatever that happened, whether it's a breach, whether it's the genuine violation, is what we'll use to actually prosecute them. Now, for you, that's how you can be absolved. So I know in many of our engagements, when we are talking to people and advising them, it could be by word of mouth or in passing. With data protection, it's different. Please document. Because when you come in to do an audit, that's the only language that we understand. If I come in and ask you something and you do not have evidence of it, to me it means that it never existed. You get it? Because I will not deal with anything with, I told them, I said the other, because that aspect of oral evidence and trying to establish it, no. So please always document. You see it, if there is a breach, because as we'll see later on, the law requires that you should report immediately. But if it happens and you tell someone, of course, there the law requires that you can notify us because there are forms to fill in, provided for in the law. But if we advise people that go ahead and do A, B, C, D, or the way we transfer information, because we had instances where an institution, they were transferring loan application papers, and they ended up in a wrong address. So now when you see these things happen, always document. What does documentation mean? It should be addressed to a person, it should be dated, and then possibly if the person has a PA or something, they confirm receipt. If it's an email, the recipients of the email should be well stated. Demonstration of consent is very key. We did an investigation, this one is public, of Safe Border. I don't know if any of you saw it. Now, Safe Border, one of the challenges they had was about consent. Now, the consent, when we reviewed their systems, when we analyzed, they had changed their privacy notice for a number of years, but we were asking, okay, we needed consent of the policy of 2017. We failed to get it. Because whenever there was an upgrade, they would overwrite. Most of you are in IT, right? You know what overwriting is. Whereby you replace and the other copy is completely ruled out. So now there, you cannot tell us that you obtain consent for that one because it's no longer there. Now, that's where data protection by design and default comes in. When you're designing these systems, these online systems, make sure that at least you have a way of tracking when that consent was obtained, of course including the time and those related aspects, so that you keep that record. Not too much of it, but you keep it in your database, so that when you come back and we are to confirm whether these people actually consented, you have that record, of course, plus who consented. Now, when I talk about the information that you should provide with the person before you collect the information, now in your setting, one of the very key ones is that one, disclosure. And I will keep talking about the investigation that at least has been made public, the one of Safe Border, it was their biggest problem, disclosure. When you are collecting this information from a person, let them know, of course, the ground on which you're relying on, medical purposes to do ABCD, and which information you'll be collecting. Of course, we'll carry out tests, so we'll be collecting maybe your blood samples, ABCD, and all the others, and with whom it may be shared with, because this is something which the law is very, very clear on. Let the person know. So if you're collecting this information from me before I take on this surgery, before I receive this advice, and then you tell me, you need to tell me with whom you may share it with. Your insurance company, ABCD, these people to do this, sharing it with our provider. Some of you have online systems, you know, this information, you share it with another hosting company. You may share it with your regulator, maybe if there is something. So let a person know with whom you may share it with. So if a person gets alarmed and they say, but wait a minute, do you need to share all this information about me with this particular person? Then they can either deny to give you their consent, or they can say, no, this one, you don't need to share it with them, so that they are informed. And how this can be covered, you know, you should have, I'm sure you already have, but in case you don't, you should have agreements, which are called data sharing agreements. Now, it may be tricky to have it as a standalone, but within the contracts that you sign with these insurance companies or these other providers, make it very, very clear about data sharing. The aspects to one, you should have with whom it may be shared with, how you should secure it. On their end, if they have it and anything happens to it, or any data breach or security-related aspects, they should inform you immediately. Because for us, when we come in to do an investigation or someone makes a complaint, the principal collector of that information is the person who will be at higher liability, who is you. Of course, they will also be punished, but now you're the person who originally collected it. But those data sharing agreements, or the contracts, when you have them and you have a particular clause, they can in a way protect you. So as data protection officers, make sure they are there. And of course now, you know, with these medical insurance companies, a lot of information can be shared. You know, they can refer you to maybe this lab does tests, then this lab shares with this doctor, then this doctor shares with another hospital. You know, by the time someone moves around and they come back to the doctor to do the diagnosis, you can realize the companies or the people they've shared with could even be a list of up to 10 people. But the question is, after sharing it, how do those people secure it? Can they share it with other people who are not even supposed to be having it? So you should really interest yourself in that.
For you to be able to abide by the laws properly and to have good ethics while collecting the data, you ought to collect that data lawfully. The first principle. These principles are in section 3 of the Act. Again, read the Act. It's a small pager Act. Understand it, because you see, like noted earlier, when they are coming for the organization, they won't only come for the corporate company. They will also come for the DPO. Okay? And like she suggested, kindly call, arrange, and ask all MDs, senior members of the organization or the hospital to be around if you happen to invite us, or the PDP office. Because now you're very important people. You know the cycle of processing, you know the obligations, you're going to learn a lot of things today. Therefore, any decision that is done in your hospital, you should be involved. You should be consulted. Ladies and gentlemen, you've gotten your passport to the boardroom. Because they will be asked, did you consult the DPO? Maybe it can even be an opportunity in this case if they don't consult you. Because if they consulted you, they will take you along. If they didn't, so it ought to be lawful. You have to be fair, transparent, and accountable. Now, in processing the aspect of lawfulness, have you obtained consent when you're processing the data? Okay? Now, we have to be very careful here. With medical records, at times, consent might not be necessary. Because think of this. This person has come, they need blood transfusion. They are dying. Now, you need their medical history. You need to know their blood type. Are they positive? I mean HIV. Who are they? Before you even think of giving them blood. So at that point, you can't start asking for consent. It would be ridiculous, isn't it? They would even call you mad. Someone's life is going and you're asking for consent? No. I think now the aspect of legal obligations comes in. Okay? Now, you might have to point at each of those when you're trying to process that information. No, that falls under lawfulness. There are 6 areas. It can be a contract. It might be necessary for national security. It might be necessary for performance of a public duty. Okay? For instance, someone has COVID. You ought to know, Yabadewani, where were they? Who did they get contact with? Yeah? We used to call it contact tracing. Okay? So, certain times you have to use these areas, but before you process that information, you ought to ask yourself whether it falls under any of those parameters. Definitely for medical purposes. But even when for medical purposes, do you have to collect everything, even those that you don't need? Okay? So it's very important to ask yourself those questions. Is it lawful? One. But have I gotten consent? Do we have a contract between these people for me to share this information? Is it necessary for a public good or for my legal obligations? So what is recommended when processing that information? Define the specific legal basis for the data processing. This is what I've been talking about. Define it. If you can't define it, you have no point processing that personal data. Okay? Carefully consider the use of informed consent as legal basis. Consent has to be explicit, it has to be informed, and unambiguous. With the law in place, we might have to be very careful what you're keeping. Because if it is established that you actually didn't need my information, and I prove it to court, now you have problems. You get it? Now, I'm not a medical personnel to know what I need or what you need, what you don't need. Now, for you just have to make sure that whatever you're keeping it lawfully, it's for the fulfillment of your obligation, it's for that research purpose, and you keep it for that. Okay? With confidence and assurity that you are not going to release it to someone else. If it goes out of your hands, that's when you realize that, but did you even need this? Okay? So you just have to be very careful that you establish the legal purpose of keeping that information. Because now, personally, I won't be in position to know what medical records might be needed 30 years to come. Okay? But you might be in position to know that and how you've been doing it. But be very careful and make sure that you link it to the legal purpose. Because in court it's proving. If you fail to prove that it was for your obligation, it was kept lawfully, and you actually needed it, then you're guilty, as you might be charged. You get it? So just have to be very careful. Don't put it under a blanket. You see, we don't know, so you collect everything and keep. Hey, be very careful. Make sure that whatever you keep, you link it to your work. It is lawful. It is for fulfillment of a contract. It is your obligation. Make sure you connect it to your obligation under the law. Otherwise, me, who is a speculator or who wants to make money, I can easily come and make money out of hospitals. You know, in the early 80s, in the US, when it was a height of cosmetics, glow, you remember that glow, wet look? You know, different cosmetology companies cosmetics company, not cosmetology, cosmetics companies, they would do adverts. Okay, so they would have girls, when you use these products, your hair will be. They would, flash it all over. Your skin would be like mine if you use this. Then people bought the products, and the hair was not like that. Now you made a promise that when I use your product, my hair will be like that one on the product. People made a lot of money out of it. You get my point? People made a lot of a killing out of such lawsuits. Now we have the Data Protection Act that is new, not only in Uganda but in Africa. Trust me, they are schemers. The likes of Marema Bilizi. They are schemers who will come and put you on the line. Okay? So be very careful. Consult. You can consult us, consult the DPO office. Okay? But be very careful. Always link your data, the information you're doing, link it to your obligation as provided under the law. If you can't link it there, and someone comes and finds a way around it, you're gone.